Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Pentos as Jon Snow stood at the window of their modest inn-room, watching the city come alive below. The events of the previous days weighed heavily on his mind. The mysterious conversation he had overheard, the cryptic words about dragons and fire that seemed to echo in his dreams. At 12 years old, Jon felt as though he stood at the edge of a precipice, uncertain whether the ground beneath his feet was solid or about to crumble away. Still brooding, are we? Ygritte's voice cut through his thoughts as she entered the room, her red hair catching the morning light. She carried a tray of bread and cheese, the simple fare they had grown accustomed to during their travels. You've been staring out that window for near an hour. Jon turned from the window, managing a weak smile. Just thinking. Dangerous habit, that, Thoros of Myr said as he emerged from the adjoining chamber, his red robes rustling. The priest looked haggard, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by something more serious, especially when one thinks too much about things beyond their understanding. The three of them had spent the better part of the week trying to uncover more information about what Jon had overheard, the talk of dragons, of fire, of something stirring in the east, and of surviving Targaryens hiding with Illyrio. They had visited taverns, spoken to merchants, even approached some of the more talkative sellswords who frequented the city's drinking establishments. Each inquiry had led to dead ends, suspicious looks, or conversations that died the moment dragons or Targaryens were mentioned. "We're getting nowhere," Jon said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Every time we ask about dragons or what's happening in the east, people either don't know or won't say." Thoros nodded grimly. "Aye, and that tells us something in itself, doesn't it? When people are afraid to speak of something, it usually means that something is worth speaking of." Ygritte tore off a piece of bread and tossed it at Jon, striking him in the chest. "Maybe they think we're mad. Three strangers wandering around asking about dragons like they're real." "But they are real," Jon said quietly, catching the bread before it could fall. "Or they were. The Targaryens had them." "Had being the important word," Ygritte replied. "Last I heard, they're all dead. Dragons and Targaryens both." Thoros moved to the small table and poured himself a cup of wine, despite the early hour. "Not all of them, girl. There are whispers, rumors of Targaryen heirs across the narrow sea. And where there are Targaryens," he let the implication hang in the air. Jon felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same sensation he had experienced during his dragon dreams. "You think there might still be dragons?" "I think," Thoros said carefully, "that the Lord of Light shows us visions for a reason. And your dreams, lad, they've been remarkably consistent." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thoros frowned, setting down his cup. "We're not expecting anyone." Jon moved toward the door, but Thoros held up a hand, stopping him. The priest approached the door cautiously, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "Who is it?" "A friend of the flame," came a voice from the other side, speaking in accented common tongue. Thoros's eyebrows rose and he quickly unbarred the door. Standing in the hallway was a man in red robes similar to Thoros's own, though his were more elaborate, decorated with intricate flame patterns worked in gold thread. He was younger than Thoros, with olive skin and dark eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "Brother Moqorro," Thoros said, stepping aside to allow the man entry. "What brings you to Pentos?" The man called Moqorro entered the room, his gaze immediately falling on Jon. "The same thing that brings you, I suspect. The flames have been active of late. Speaking of things to come." Jon felt uncomfortable under the man's scrutiny, as though those dark eyes could see straight through him. Gennady moved closer to Jon's side, her hand resting on her dagger. "Jon Snow," Moqorro said, and it wasn't a question. "The wolf touched by fire." "How do you?" Jon began, but Moqorro held up a hand. "The flames speak of many things, young wolf. They speak of ice and fire, of dragons stirring in the east, of ancient powers awakening." He turned to Thoros. "You seek answers about what the boy overheard." Thoros nodded slowly. "We do, but our inquiries have yielded little." Moqorro smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That is because you have been asking the wrong people. Come, there are others you should meet." The Temple of Rocklore in Pentos was larger than Jon had expected, its red stone walls rising high above the surrounding buildings. Flames danced in braziers along the walls, casting flickering shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air was thick with incense, and the low murmur of prayers in Old Valyrian. Moqorro led them through the temple's halls to a chamber where several other red priests had gathered. They were a diverse group, some young, some old, representing various free cities and even lands beyond. All wore the same expression of solemn purpose. "Brothers," Moqorro announced, "I present Thoros of Myr, servant of the Lord of Light, and his companions." An elderly woman with silver hair and burned scars covering half her face stepped forward. "I am Melisandre of Ashai," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "We have been expecting you." Jon felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warmth of the chamber. "Expecting us?" "The flames have shown us much, child," Melisandre replied. "They speak of a convergence, of paths that must be walked, and destinies that must be fulfilled." Thoros looked skeptical. "And what exactly do these flames tell you about our purpose here?" Another priest, this one a middle-aged man with intricate tattoos covering his arms, spoke up. "They speak of Valyria." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Jon had heard stories of the Valyrian freehold, the great empire that had ruled much of Essos before the Doom. It was said to be a cursed place now, where demons dwelt among the ruins and the very stones were poisoned. "Valyria is death," Ygritte said bluntly. "Everyone knows that." "Death, yes," Melisandre agreed, "but also rebirth. The Doom that destroyed the freehold also preserved certain artifacts, relics of power that have slept for centuries." Jon's heart began to race. "Dragon relics." The priests exchanged glances. "Among other things," the tattooed priest said carefully, "the dragons of Valyria were bound to their riders through more than mere training. There were rituals, artifacts that strengthened the bond between dragon and dragonlord. Have you considered why the dragons we saw weak later in Westeros than in Valyria? It was because with Valyria's destruction information of those rituals and of those relics were lost. Maybe there are some in the ruins still, or maybe not. But the dragons are gone," Jon said, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. "Are they?" Melisandre asked, her red eyes boring into his. "Tell me, child, what do you see when you dream?" Jon hesitated, glancing at Thoros, who nodded encouragingly. "I see a dragon, black scales, red eyes. It speaks to me, calls me blood of fire, child of snow." Several of the priests drew sharp breaths. Melisandre's scarred face showed the first hint of emotion Jon had seen from her, something that might have been excitement or fear. "The prophecy," she whispered. Ice and fire joined as one. "What prophecy?" Jon demanded. But before anyone could answer, Moqorro stepped forward. "There is an ancient text," he said, "written by the dragon lords before the Doom. It speaks of a time when dragons would return, when ice and fire would meet, when the world would be remade. Most dismissed it as the ravings of a mad prophet, but the flames suggest otherwise." Thoros drained his cup of wine in one gulp. "And you think Jon is part of this prophecy?" "I think," Melisandre said slowly, "that the boy's dreams are not dreams at all, but visions. And if that is true, then there are things in Valyria that he must find." The rest of the day was spent in intense discussion. The Red Priests spoke of ancient magics, of the bond between dragons and their riders, of artifacts that could awaken dormant powers. They showed Jon texts written in High Valyrian, pointing out passages that spoke of the prince that was promised, and the song of ice and fire. As the sun began to set, Jon found himself on the temple's roof terrace with Ygritte looking out over the city. The conversations had left his head spinning with possibilities and fears. "You're scared," Ygritte observed, not making it a question. Jon nodded. "Wouldn't you be? They're talking about prophecies and dragons and journeying to a cursed land. A year and a half ago, the most exciting thing in my life was sword practice with Ser Roderick." Ygritte was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember what you told me when we first met? About wanting to see the world, to have adventures? This isn't what I had in mind." "Maybe not," she agreed, "but it's what you've got. And from what I can tell, you can either embrace it or spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Before Jon could respond, Thoros appeared on the terrace, carrying a torch despite the braziers that already lit the space. "Ah, there you are. Moqorro wants to show you something." They followed Thoros back into the temple, to a chamber Jon hadn't seen before. It was circular, with a raised dais in the center where a large brazier burned with flames that seemed to dance in patterns too complex to be natural. "The flames of prophecy," Moqorro explained. "They show truth to those who know how to look." "I don't know how to look," Jon said. "Then learn." Melisandre said, appearing beside him like a shadow. Gaze into the flames. Let them speak to you. Jon approached the brazier hesitantly. The flames were mesmerizing, shifting colors from red to orange to gold and back again. As he stared, the patterns seemed to resolve into shapes. A great city by the sea, dragons soaring overhead, a young woman with silver hair walking through fire unburned. What do you see? Thoros asked softly. A city, Jon whispered, made of black stone, with towers that reach toward the sky, and dragons, so many dragons. Valyria, Melisandre breathed. You see Valyria as it was. The vision shifted, and Jon saw the same city in ruins, its towers broken, its streets filled with ash and shadow. But in the depths of the ruins something moved, something large and serpentine, with scales that gleamed like obsidian. There's something there, Jon said, his voice barely audible. In the ruins. It's waiting. The flames suddenly flared higher, and Jon stumbled backward, the vision breaking. His heart was pounding, and he could taste ash in his mouth. The flames have spoken, Makoro said solemnly. Your path is clear, young wolf. Valyria calls to you. That night, as they returned to their inn, Jon found himself walking in silence between Thoros and Ygritte. The weight of what he had seen, what the priests had told him, pressed down on him like a physical burden. You don't have to do this, Thoros said finally. We could return to Westeros, find you a place at court, or perhaps with one of the great houses. You're Ned Stark's son, bastard or not. There would be opportunities. Jon considered this. A safe life, a predictable path. It was tempting, especially after everything they had been through. But even as he thought about it, he could feel the pull of something greater, something that called to him from across the smoking sea. No, he said quietly. I need to know about the dreams, about what's waiting in Valyria. I need to understand what's happening to me. Ygritte grinned. Good. I was getting bored with all this talk of going home. Besides, she added, nudging him with her elbow, someone needs to keep you from getting yourself killed in a cursed wasteland. Thoros chuckled, though there was little humor in it. The Lord of Light has plans for you, boy. Bigger than mine. Bigger than your father's. I've known it since the day we met, but seeing you in that temple, it's clearer now than ever. What kind of plans? Jon asked. The kind that changed the world, Thoros replied. For better or worse. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as they prepared for their journey south. The Red Priests had provided them with maps, supplies, and warnings about the dangers they would face. Valyria was not a destination one simply sailed to. The smoking sea was treacherous, filled with demons and worse things, and the ruins themselves were said to be cursed. We'll need to approach carefully, Thoros explained, as they studied the maps. There are islands in the smoking sea, places where we can rest and resupply, and there are guides, people who know the safe paths through the ruins. What kind of people would know safe paths through a cursed wasteland? Ygritte asked skeptically. The kind you don't want to meet in a dark alley, Thoros replied grimly. But desperate times call for desperate measures. As they prepared to leave Pentos, Jon felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. He was about to embark on a journey that would take him to one of the most dangerous places in the known world, in search of answers to questions he barely understood. But something deep inside him, the same instinct that had driven him to leave Winterfell, told him this was the right path. Their first stop would be Volantis, where they would need to find passage across the smoking sea. From there, the journey would become increasingly perilous, but also, Jon hoped, increasingly illuminating. 6 months later, the road from Pentos to Volantis had been long and eventful, filled with encounters that had tested Jon's growing skills and resolve. They had traveled with merchant caravans, sellsword companies, and sometimes alone through the wild lands between the free cities. In Norvos, they had encountered a group of bearded priests who challenged Thoros to a theological debate that lasted 3 days and ended with all parties thoroughly drunk and no closer to agreement. Jon had learned much about the various religions of Essos during those debates and had begun to understand that the world was far more complex than the simple faith of the 7 he had known in Winterfell. Near Quahor, they had been attacked by a band of Dothraki raiders who had strayed far from their usual hunting grounds. The fight had been brief but vicious, and Jon had killed his first man, a young Dothraki warrior not much older than himself. The experience had left him shaken, but also more aware of his own capabilities. Thoros had been proud of how Jon had handled himself, while Ygritte had simply nodded approvingly and helped him clean his sword. Death is part of life, she had told him that night as they sat by their campfire. The important thing is to make sure you're the one still breathing when it's over. In the ruins of Targaryen, the ancient Rhinar city on the river, they had encountered something that defied explanation. While exploring the partially submerged buildings, Jon had felt a strange resonance, as though the stones themselves were singing to him. When he had mentioned this to Thoros, the priest had gone very quiet and insisted they leave immediately. Some places hold memories, Thoros had explained later, and some memories are better left undisturbed. But it was in the forest near Selhorus that they had their most significant encounter. They had been traveling with a small merchant caravan when they were approached by a group of riders, unlike any Jon had ever seen. They wore armor of black steel and rode horses that seemed too large and too intelligent to be natural. Their leader was a woman with silver hair and violet eyes, unmistakably Valyrian features. "You travel toward the smoking sea," she had said, her voice carrying an accent Jon couldn't place. "Few are foolish enough to make such a journey willingly." Thoros had been immediately wary, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "Our business is our own, my lady." The woman had smiled, but it hadn't been a pleasant expression. "I am Saleh of House Belarus, last of my line. My family once ruled dragons in old Valyria. I know the signs of one touched by dragonfire." Her gaze had fallen on Jon, and he had felt that familiar chill. "You dream of them, don't you, boy? The great worms of the freehold?" Jon had wanted to deny it, but something in her eyes had compelled honesty. "Yes." "Then you are either very blessed or very cursed," Sarah had said. "Perhaps both. Valyria calls to its own, even after all these years." She had offered to guide them through the more dangerous parts of their journey, for a price. Thoros had been reluctant, but Jon had felt drawn to her, sensing a kindred spirit in someone else who carried the weight of ancient bloodlines. Their time with Solansara had been educational in ways Jon hadn't expected. She had taught him fragments of High Valyrian, had shown him how to read the ancient script, and had shared stories of old Valyria that weren't found in any history book. The dragons were not pets, she had told him one evening as they camped in the ruins of an ancient watchtower. They were partners, bound to their riders by blood and fire and will. The bond was so strong that when a dragon died, its rider often followed within days. "How do you know all this?" Jon had asked. "Because my ancestors lived it," she had replied, "and because some knowledge survives, even when everything else burns." When they had finally parted ways at the crossroads outside Volantis, Sarah had given Jon a gift, a small pendant made of what looked like black glass carved in the shape of a dragon. "Dragon glass," she had explained. "It will protect you in the ruins, and perhaps help you find what you seek." "What am I seeking?" Jon had asked. "That," she had said with another of her unsettling smiles, "is for you to discover." Now as Jon stood on the docks of Volantis, watching the sun set over the Rhoyne, he fingered the dragon glass pendant and thought about how much he had changed in the past months. He was 13 now, taller and stronger than when they had left Pentos. The soft boy who had left Winterfell was gone, replaced by someone harder, more confident, but also more aware of the darkness that existed in the world. "Second thoughts?" Ygritte asked, joining him at the dock's edge. She too had changed during their travels, becoming more serious, more focused. The playful girl was still there, but tempered now by experience. "Many," Jon admitted, "but not enough to turn back." Thoros approached, carrying a leather satchel. "I've found us passage," he announced. "A captain named Quavo Nagaris. He sailed the smoking sea before and lived to tell about it. He'll take us to the ruins for a price that won't leave us completely destitute." "When do we leave?" Jon asked. "With the morning tide," Thoros replied, "which gives us one last night to prepare ourselves, and to pray that the Lord of Light watches over fools and madmen." As they walked back toward their inn, Jon felt the familiar stirring in his chest, the pull toward something vast and dangerous and necessary. Tomorrow they would sail into the smoking sea, toward the ruins of the greatest civilization the world had ever known. Toward answers, toward destiny, toward whatever waited in the Dragon Lord's ancient home. The dreams had been growing stronger during their travels, more vivid and more frequent. Sometimes he woke with the taste of ash and fire in his mouth, sometimes with the echo of a great voice calling his name. Whatever was waiting for him in Valyria, it was growing impatient. "Are you ready for this?" Thoros asked, as they reached their inn. Jon looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, then at his companions, the priest who had become like a father to him, the wildling girl who had become his closest friend and confidant. They had all come so far from where they started, all changed by the journey they had undertaken together. "I don't know if anyone can be ready for this," Jon said honestly, "but I know I have to try." As they entered the inn for what might be their last comfortable night for a long time, Jon felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a cloak. Tomorrow would bring them one step closer to the answers he sought, one step closer to understanding what the dreams meant, what the voices in the flames were trying to tell him. The boy who had left Winterfell in search of adventure had found something far greater and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Now, as he prepared to enter the cursed ruins of Valyria itself, Jon Snow could only hope he was strong enough to survive what he might find there. The flames of prophecy had spoken, and their words had set him on a path that would lead either to glory or to destruction. Perhaps, he thought as he settled into his bed for the night, they were the same thing. In his dreams that night, the dragon called to him again, its voice clearer than ever before. "Come home, child of ice and fire. Come home to where it all began." And Jon knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that he would answer that call. The morning mist clung to the waters of the smoking sea like the breath of sleeping dragons, thick and acrid with the scent of sulfur and ash. Jon Snow stood at the bow of the Maiden's Folly, watching the cursed waters part before their vessel as Captain Quavo Nogaris guided them through channels known only to the most desperate of smugglers. At 13, Jon had grown taller during their months of travel, his shoulders broader, but he still felt small against the vastness of this haunted sea. "First time seeing the smoking sea, boy?" asked Gareth Stone, one of the sellswords they had hired in Volantis. The man was scarred and grizzled, with arms like tree trunks and a voice roughened by years of shouting orders over the din of battle. "It's a sight that stays with you, that's for certain." Jon nodded, not trusting his voice. The water around them was an unnatural shade of green-black, and occasionally he could see shapes moving beneath the surface, things that were too large and too strange to be fish. Steam rose from the water in places, and in the distance he could see the jagged peaks of what had once been mountains, now twisted into impossible shapes by the doom that had destroyed the Valyrian freehold 4 centuries ago. "Don't stare too long," warned another sellsword, a lean woman named Mira Blackwater. "The sea plays tricks on your eyes. Makes you see things that ain't there, or worse, makes you see things that are." Thoros of Myr emerged from below deck, his red robes billowing in the sulphurous wind. The priest looked haggard, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by grim determination. "How much farther, Captain?" he called to Quavo. The Volantine captain, a weathered man with intricate tattoos covering his dark skin, spat over the side. "We'll reach the outer ruins by midday, but I won't take my ship any closer than that. The waters get too shallow, and there are things that don't take kindly to visitors." Egrets appeared at Jon's side, her red hair whipping in the wind. She had been quieter than usual since they'd entered the smoking sea, and Jon could see the tension in her shoulders. "You're brooding again," she said, but her usual teasing tone was subdued. "Hard not to," Jon replied. "This place, it feels wrong, like the very air is poisoned." "Maybe it is," she said, then forced a grin. "But we've come this far, haven't we? No point in getting cold feet now." Jon touched the dragon glass pendant Sarah had given him, feeling its smooth surface warm against his skin. The dreams had been growing stronger as they approached Valyria, more vivid and more urgent. Last night he had dreamed of walking through streets of black stone while a great dragon with scales like obsidian and eyes of molten gold followed him, calling his name in a voice like thunder. "Jon," Thoros said, approaching them, "a word." They moved to a quieter part of the deck, away from the sellswords and smugglers who made up their expedition. Thoros pulled out a leather pouch filled with dried herbs and began crushing them between his fingers. "Protection," he explained when he saw Jon's questioning look. "The Lord of Light's blessing against the curses of this place. I want you and Ygritte to rub this on your skin and clothes. It may not stop everything, but it should help ward off the worst of it." The herbs had a sharp medicinal smell that made Jon's eyes water. As he rubbed them on his arms and face, he felt a slight tingling sensation, as though the mixture was reacting to something in the air around them. "Thoros," Jon said quietly, "what exactly are we looking for in there?" The priest was silent for a long moment, staring out at the twisted landscape ahead of them. "Answers," he said finally. "About your dreams, about the visions in the flames. The Red Priests in Pentos spoke of artifacts, relics of the Dragon Lords. If such things exist, they would be in the heart of old Valyria. And if they don't exist—" Thoros met his eyes. "Then we'll have risked our lives for nothing. But I don't think that's the case." The flames don't lie, John. They may be cryptic, they may show us things we don't understand, but they don't lie. A shout from Captain Quavo interrupted their conversation. There! The outer ruins! John rushed to the bow and felt his breath catch in his throat. Rising from the mist-shrouded waters were the remains of what had once been a great city. Towers of black stone stretched toward the sky like the fingers of a buried giant, some intact, others broken and twisted by the forces that had destroyed them. The architecture was unlike anything John had ever seen, graceful and alien, with curves and spirals that seemed to defy the laws of nature. "By the Seven," whispered one of the sellswords. "It's real." "Of course it's real, you fool," snapped Myra Blackwater. "Question is whether we'll live long enough to regret seeing it." Captain Quavo guided the ship toward a partially collapsed pier that jutted out from what had once been a harbor. The water here was shallower, and John could see the remains of other ships beneath the surface. Some recent, others so old they had become part of the sea floor. "This is as far as I go," Quavo announced. "I'll wait here for 3 days. If you're not back by then, I'm leaving with or without you." "Fair enough," Thoros replied. "We'll need the boat to get ashore." As they prepared to disembark, John noticed that several of the sellswords were making religious gestures. Some touched iron, others muttered prayers to various gods. Even Gareth Stone, who had seemed fearless, was fingering a small charm around his neck. The boat that carried them to shore cut through water that seemed thicker than it should be, almost oily. As they drew closer to the ruins, John could hear sounds echoing from the mist. Distant cries that might have been human, or might have been something else entirely. "Stone men," Myra said grimly when she saw John's expression. "Poor bastards who got too close to the cursed waters. The grayscale takes them, turns them into living statues. They say they go mad from the pain, wandering the ruins and attacking anything that moves." "Cheerful," Ygritte muttered, but John noticed she had moved closer to him, and her hand rested on her bow. They landed at what had once been a grand staircase leading up from the harbor. The steps were cracked and overgrown with strange phosphorescent moss that glowed with an eerie green light. As they climbed, John felt the temperature rising, as though they were walking into a furnace. "Stay together," Thoros commanded, "and keep your weapons ready. We don't know what we might encounter in there." The expedition consisted of 8 people: John, Ygritte, and Thoros, plus 5 sellswords: Gareth Stone, Myra Blackwater, a young Taroshi named Daemon Brightflame, a silent Dothraki called Coro, and a grizzled Westerosi exile named Ser Jorah Mormont, who claimed to be seeking redemption for past sins. As they entered the ruins proper, John felt a strange sensation, as though the very stones were watching them. The buildings around them were massive, built on a scale that dwarfed even the Red Keep. Dragons had once perched on those towers, he realized. This had been a city built for dragon lords. "Look at the stonework," Daemon Brightflame said in wonder, running his hand along a wall. "How did they cut it so perfectly? There are no seams, no mortar. It's like the entire building was carved from a single piece of rock." "Dragon fire," Ser Jorah said grimly. "They used dragons to melt and shape the stone. That's why it looks so organic." They had been walking for perhaps an hour when they heard the first scream. It echoed through the ruins, a sound of pure agony that made John's blood run cold. Ygritte immediately knocked an arrow, while the sellswords drew their weapons. "Stone men," Myra whispered. "They've caught our scent." "How far?" Thoros asked. Another scream, closer this time, followed by the sound of something heavy moving through the rubble. "Too close," Gareth said. "We need to find shelter." They hurried through the ruins, looking for a building that was still intact enough to provide protection. The screams continued, sometimes near, sometimes far, but always present. John found himself gripping his sword so tightly his knuckles were white. There, Ygritte pointed to a structure that looked like it had once been a temple or palace. Its dome was cracked but still standing, and the entrance was partially blocked by fallen stones, enough to slow down pursuers but not prevent their escape. They squeezed through the gap and found themselves in a vast circular chamber. The walls were covered with murals depicting dragons and their riders, the colors still vivid after 4 centuries. In the center of the room was a raised dais with what looked like an altar, though it was unlike any altar John had ever seen. It was made of black stone and carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. "This place," Thoros breathed. "It's a temple to the 14 Flames, the old gods of Valyria." "Old gods that couldn't save their worshippers," Ser Jorah observed grimly. They made camp in the temple, posting watches and trying to rest despite the occasional screams from outside. Jon found sleep difficult, and when it finally came, it brought dreams more vivid than any he had experienced before. He was walking through the ruins, but they were whole and alive, filled with people in elaborate robes and fantastic beasts that served as mounts and companions. Dragons filled the sky, their riders calling to each other in High Valyrian. And always, in the background, was the great black dragon with golden eyes, watching him with an intelligence that was both ancient and patient. "You have come at last," the dragon said, its voice resonating through Jon's bones. "Blood of my blood, fire of my fire, you have come home." "I don't understand," Jon said in the dream. "What do you want from me?" "What I have always wanted," the dragon replied, "to live, to fly, to burn away the darkness that threatens to consume the world." Jon woke with a start to find Ygritte shaking him gently. "You were talking in your sleep," she said, in a language I didn't recognize. "High Valyrian," Thoros said from across the chamber. "I caught a few words. You were saying something about fire and blood." Before Jon could respond, Gareth Stone, who was on watch, hissed for silence. "Someone's coming," he whispered. They listened, and sure enough they could hear footsteps approaching the temple. But these weren't the shambling steps of stone men. They were too regular, too purposeful. "Demon," Mira called softly. "Where's Demon?" They looked around and realized the young Taroshi was gone, along with half their supplies. "That bastard," Gareth snarled. "He's run off with our food and water." "More than that," Ser Jorah said grimly, checking his pack. "He's taken the map Chiavo gave us. Without it, we'll never find our way back to the ship." The footsteps were getting closer now, and they could hear voices, human voices, speaking in what sounded like corrupted High Valyrian. "Stone men," Thoros said, "but ones that can still think and speak. The worst kind." "We need to move," Jon said, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. "If Daemon took the map, we need to catch him before he gets too far." "The boy's right," Mira agreed. "Better to face one thief than a dozen stone men." They gathered their remaining supplies and slipped out of the temple through a crack in the back wall. The ruins stretched out before them, a maze of broken buildings and twisted streets. In the distance they could see a figure moving through the rubble, Demon, laden with stolen goods. "I'll go after him," Jon said. "I'm the fastest." "Not alone, you won't," Ygritte said firmly. "She's right," Thoros added. "This place is too dangerous to split up." But even as they argued, Daemon disappeared into a large building that looked like it had once been a library or archive. Jon made a decision that surprised even him. He broke away from the group and sprinted after the thief. "Jon," Ygritte called, but he was already gone. The building Daemon had entered was partially collapsed, its upper floors having fallen into the lower ones. Jon picked his way carefully through the rubble, following the sound of movement ahead of him. The air here was thick with dust and the smell of old parchment and decay. He found Daemon in what had once been a reading room, frantically stuffing supplies into his pack. The young Taroshi looked up when Jon appeared, his face a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I'm sorry," Daemon said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I have a family in Tyrosh. I can't die in this cursed place." "Then give us back our supplies and the map," Jon said, drawing his sword. "We'll find another way." Daemon laughed bitterly. "You think I'm stupid? The moment I give you the map, you'll leave me here to rot. No, I'm taking everything and getting back to the ship. You can find your own way." He turned to run, but Jon was faster. He tackled the older boy, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and scattered supplies. Daemon was stronger, but Jon had been training with Thoros for months, and desperation gave him strength. They rolled across the floor, fighting for control of Daemon's weapon, a curved dagger that gleamed in the phosphorescent light filtering through the cracks in the ceiling. Jon managed to get his hands on the blade, but as he did, he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. A deep, ominous creaking, like the groaning of a ship in a storm. "The ceiling," Daemon gasped, his eyes wide with terror. Jon looked up and saw cracks spreading across what remained of the upper floor. Their fight had disturbed the delicate balance that had kept the ruins stable, and now tons of stone and debris were about to come crashing down. "Move!" Jon shouted, grabbing Daemon and hauling him toward the nearest exit. They ran as the building began to collapse around them, chunks of masonry crashing down like hail. Jon felt something strike his shoulder, sending him stumbling, but he kept moving. Behind them, the reading room disappeared under an avalanche of stone and dust. They burst out of the building just as the entire structure came down with a roar that echoed through the ruins. Jon and Daemon lay gasping in the street, covered in dust and debris. "The supplies," Daemon said weakly. "They're buried." Jon wanted to be angry, but he found he couldn't muster the energy. They were alive, and in a place like this, that was more than many could say. "Jon," Ygritte's voice called from somewhere in the dust cloud. "Jon, where are you?" "Here," he called back, helping Daemon to his feet. "We're here." Thoros appeared through the settling dust, his face grim with worry and relief. "You fool boy," he said, but there was affection in his voice. "Don't ever do that again." "The supplies?" Meera asked. "Gone," Jon said, "but we're alive." "And we still have the map," Daemon said quietly, pulling the rolled parchment from inside his shirt. I'm sorry, I was scared." Gareth Stone looked like he wanted to throttle the young Tyroshi, but Ser Gora put a restraining hand on his arm. "Fear makes men do stupid things," the knight said. "The question is what we do now." They were interrupted by another sound. Not the screams of stone men this time, but something else. A low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from deep underground. "What is that?" Ygritte asked. Thoros closed his eyes, listening intently. "I don't know, but it's coming from that direction." He pointed toward the heart of the ruins, where the largest and most intact buildings stood. "We should go back to the ship," Daemon said. "We've lost half our supplies, and this place is getting more dangerous by the hour." "No," Jon said firmly. "We came here for a reason. We're not leaving empty-handed." The thrumming grew stronger as they moved deeper into the ruins, and Jon began to feel a strange resonance in his chest, as though his heartbeat was trying to match the rhythm. The dragonglass pendant around his neck grew warm, then hot. They passed through what had once been a grand plaza, dominated by a massive statue of a dragon and rider. The statue was cracked and weathered, but still impressive. At its base were inscriptions in High Valyrian that Thoros tried to translate. "Something about fire and blood," he said slowly, and "here lies the heart of the world." I think this was some kind of monument to the Dragon Lords. The thrumming was very strong now, and Jon could see that it was affecting the others too. Ygritte kept looking around nervously, while the sellswords muttered prayers and curses in equal measure. "There," Jon said, pointing to a building that rose above the others, like a black spear thrust into the sky. "It's coming from there." The building was clearly important. Its architecture was more elaborate than the others, and it was surrounded by what had once been gardens, now overgrown with strange luminescent plants. As they approached, Jon could see that the entrance was sealed with a massive stone door covered in warning symbols. "This is a bad idea," Meera said. "Those symbols, they're warnings, telling people to stay away." "Or telling them what they'll find inside," Thoros countered. "Jon, what do you think?" Jon approached the door, and as he did, the dragonglass pendant became almost too hot to bear. The symbols on the door seemed to pulse with their own light, and he could swear he heard whispers in High Valyrian. "I think," he said slowly, "that this is what we came here to find." It took all of them working together to move the massive stone door, but eventually it ground open with a sound like thunder. Beyond was a staircase leading down into darkness, and the thrumming sound was much stronger now. "I'll go first," Jon said, but Thoros shook his head. "We go together, or not at all." They descended the stairs, using torches to light their way. The walls were covered with more murals, these depicting the history of the Dragon Lords, their rise to power, their conquest of much of Essos, and finally their destruction and the doom. At the bottom of the stairs was a circular chamber with a domed ceiling. In the center was a raised platform, and on that platform, 7 hells, Gareth breathed. There were 2 objects on the platform, each about the size of a man's head. They were clearly eggs, but unlike any eggs Jon had ever seen. One was black as midnight, with veins of deep red running through it like cracks in obsidian. The other was crimson, shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with their own light. "Dragon eggs," Thoros whispered. "By the Lord of Light, they're dragon eggs." As Jon approached the platform, both eggs began to glow more brightly, and the thrumming sound reached a crescendo. He could feel heat radiating from them, not the heat of fire, but something deeper and more primal. "Don't touch them," Ser Jorah warned. "Dragon eggs are said to be cursed, that's why they're so valuable, and so dangerous." But Jon was already reaching out, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't resist. The moment his fingers touched the black egg, the world exploded into sensation. He was flying, soaring above the ruins of Valyria, as they had been before the doom. Below him, the great city stretched to the horizon, its towers gleaming in the sunlight. Dragons filled the sky around him, and he could hear their voices calling to him in welcome. Then the vision shifted, and he was standing in a great hall filled with people in elaborate robes. They were speaking in High Valyrian, but somehow he could understand every word. The prophecy speaks of one who will come, an elderly man was saying. One who carries both ice and fire in his blood. He will wake the dragons from their stone sleep and lead them in the final battle against the darkness. And if he fails, asked a woman with silver hair. Then the world burns, the man replied, and from the ashes something new will be born. The vision faded, and Jon found himself back in the chamber, his hands still resting on the egg. The others were staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "What did you see?" Thoros asked. "The past," Jon said slowly, "and maybe the future." He picked up both eggs, surprised by how light they felt despite their size. They were warm to the touch, and he could swear he felt something moving inside them. "We need to get these back to the ship," he said. "Are you mad?" Daemon asked. "Those things are cursed. They'll bring nothing but death and destruction." "Maybe," Jon agreed, "but they're also the reason we came here. I'm not leaving them behind." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Jon noticed something else. A small alcove in the wall that contained what looked like a book, bound in scales that shimmered with their own light. "A Dragon Lord's journal," Thoros said, examining it carefully. "This could contain knowledge lost for centuries." They gathered their finds and began the long journey back to the surface. The thrumming had stopped, and the ruins seemed quieter now, as though something that had been waiting for a long time had finally been awakened. They made it back to the harbor without further incident, though they could hear the stone men calling to each other in the distance. Captain Quavo was waiting for them, his face grim with worry. "You're early," he said. "I wasn't expecting you for another day." "We found what we came for," Thoros replied. "Now let's get out of here before something finds us." As the Maiden's Folly pulled away from the cursed shore, Jon stood at the stern, watching the ruins of Valyria disappear into the mist. The dragon eggs were wrapped in his cloak, hidden from the eyes of the crew, but he could feel their warmth against his back. "What happens now?" Ygritte asked, joining him at the rail. "I don't know," Jon admitted, "but I think our lives just got a lot more complicated." Thoros appeared beside them, his expression serious. "Those eggs," he said quietly, "keep them hidden. Men have killed for less, and if word gets out that you have them—" "I understand," Jon said. "Do you?" Thoros asked. "Because this is just the beginning, Jon. The flames have shown me glimpses of what's to come, and it's going to test everything you think you know about yourself and the world." Jon looked down at the bundle in his arms, feeling the warmth of the eggs through the cloth. In his dreams, the great black dragon had called him home. Now, as they sailed away from the ruins of the greatest civilization the world had ever known, he wondered if he was carrying that home with him. The dragon eggs pulsed gently against his chest, like sleeping hearts waiting to wake. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Jon could swear he heard the whisper of ancient voices, speaking words of fire and blood. The boy who had left Winterfell in search of adventure had found something far more dangerous and far more wonderful than he had ever imagined. Now, as the smoking sea fell behind them, Jon Snow carried with him the seeds of legends and the weight of a destiny he was only beginning to understand. The acrid wind of the smoking sea whipped across the deck of the Maiden's Folly as Captain Quavo Nogaris barked orders to his crew. The ship groaned under the strain of navigating the treacherous waters, its hull scraping against submerged debris from the ancient catastrophe that had claimed old Valyria. Jon Snow stood near the stern, clutching the wrapped bundle containing the dragon eggs against his chest, feeling their warmth seep through the cloth like living coals. "How much farther to clear water?" Thoros called to the captain, his red robes billowing in the sulphurous breeze. "Another hour, maybe two," Quavo replied, his weathered face creased with worry. "The currents are strange today. It's as if the sea itself doesn't want to let us go." Jon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Since they had left the ruined temple with the eggs, everything had felt wrong. The water around them seemed thicker, more viscous, and strange shapes moved beneath the surface. Things that were too large and too purposeful to be mere fish. Ygritte moved to his side, her bow strung and ready. She had been on edge since they'd boarded the ship, constantly scanning the mist-shrouded ruins they were leaving behind. "Something's following us," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Jon asked, though he had felt it too. A sense of being watched, of predatory intelligence tracking their movements. "In the water," she replied, pointing to their wake. "Look closely." Jon peered into the dark waters and saw them pale shapes moving just beneath the surface, keeping pace with the ship. At first he thought they might be dolphins or some other sea creature, but as one broke the surface briefly, he caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. It had once been human. "Stone men," breathed Ser Jorah Mormont, who had joined them at the rail. The exiled knight's face was grim. "They can swim, after a fashion. The grayscale doesn't kill them, just changes them." "How many?" Thoros asked, appearing beside them. "Too many," Mira Blackwater said from the rigging where she had climbed for a better view. "They're coming from all directions. Must be dozens of them." The surviving members of their expedition gathered on deck. They had lost 2 men in the ruins. Coro the Dothraki had been crushed when part of a building collapsed, and another sellsword named Willem had simply vanished during their retreat, leaving only screams echoing through the twisted streets. That left Jon, Ygritte, Thoros, Ser Jorah, Mira, Gareth Stone, and the young Taroshi Daemon Brightflame, who had been sullen and withdrawn since his failed attempt to steal their supplies. "They're getting closer," Captain Cavo called out, his voice tight with fear. "I've seen this before. They'll try to climb aboard." As if summoned by his words, the first of the stone men broke the surface near the ship's bow. What had once been a man was now a grotesque parody of humanity. Its skin mottled with gray scales, its eyes milky white with blindness. But it moved with terrible purpose, its scaled hands grasping for the ship's hull. "7 hells," Gareth Stone muttered, drawing his sword. "They're all around us." More stone men emerged from the water, their movements creating ripples that spread across the unnatural sea. Some tried to climb the ship's sides, their scaled fingers finding purchase on the weathered wood. Others simply floated nearby, as if waiting for something. "Why aren't they attacking?" Daemon asked, his voice high with fear. "They are," Thoros said grimly. "They're hurting us, driving us towards something." Jon felt the dragon eggs pulse against his chest, their warmth increasing. In his mind he could hear something. Not quite a voice, but a presence, ancient and vast and hungry. The eggs were responding to the proximity of so much death and corruption. "There," Ygritte shouted, pointing toward a cluster of partially submerged ruins ahead of them. "Something's moving in those buildings." Jon squinted through the mist and saw them more stone men, but these were different. They stood upright in the shallow water, and some still wore the remnants of fine clothing. These had been nobles once, perhaps even dragon lords, before the grayscale claimed them. "They're trying to force us into the ruins," Ser Jorah realized. "Into an ambush." Captain Cavo spun the wheel hard to port, trying to steer away from the trap, but the stone men in the water moved to block their path. The ship shuddered as something large struck the hull from below. "They're underneath us too," Mira called out. "The whole bloody sea is crawling with them." That's when the first stone man made it over the rail. It had once been a woman, Jon realized with horror. The grayscale had preserved her long hair, though it was now the color of ash, and her dress, though tattered, still showed traces of expensive silk. But her face was a mask of gray scales, and her blind eyes wept tears of blood. Gareth Stone moved to intercept her, his sword flashing in the dim light. The blade struck her shoulder, but instead of cutting through flesh, it rang against stone-hard scales. The creature didn't even seem to notice the blow as it reached for him with fingers that ended in razor-sharp points. "The scales are like armor," Gareth shouted, dancing back from her grasp. "Swords won't cut them." More stone men were climbing aboard now, their movements slow but inexorable. The crew of the Maiden's Folly fought desperately, using boat hooks and axes to try to push them back into the sea, but for every one they managed to dislodge, 2 more took its place. Jon drew his sword, but he could see it would be useless against these creatures. The blade that had served him well against human opponents would be no more effective than Gareth's had been. Fear gripped him as he watched the stone men advance across the deck, their blind eyes somehow tracking the movements of the living. That's when he saw Ygritte in danger. She had backed against the mainmast, her bow useless at such close range, as 2 stone men closed in on her. One had been a child once, no older than Jon himself, but the grayscale had twisted its small form into something nightmarish. The other was massive, probably a warrior in life, its stone-scaled hands reaching for her throat. "Ygritte," Jon shouted, moving toward her without thinking. But he was too far away, and there were stone men between them. He watched in horror as the larger creature's hands closed around her neck, lifting her off the deck. She struggled, her face turning red as the thing began to squeeze. Something inside Jon snapped. He grabbed a torch from a nearby bracket, intending to use it as a club, but the moment his fingers closed around the wooden handle, the flame blazed higher. Not just higher, it changed, becoming white-hot and so bright it hurt to look at directly. The nearest stone man turned toward him, attracted by the sudden flare of light, and Jon swung the torch at its face. The creature screamed a sound like grinding stone, as the flame seared across its scaled features. Where the fire touched, the gray scales cracked and blackened, and for the first time, the stone man showed pain. Jon didn't stop to think about what was happening. He pressed forward, the torch blazing in his hand like a piece of the sun itself. The stone men fell back before him, their blind eyes somehow sensing the terrible heat he carried. "Get away from her!" he roared, swinging the torch at the creature holding Ygritte. The flame struck the stone man's arm, and it released her with another of those grinding screams. The scales on its arm were glowing red-hot, cracking like heated metal. It stumbled backward, clutching its burned limb. Jon didn't give it a chance to recover. He thrust the torch forward, and the flame seemed to leap from the wood, engulfing the creature's head and torso. It collapsed to the deck, its stone-scaled body smoking and cracking. The other stone men hesitated, their primitive minds recognizing a threat they couldn't understand. Jon advanced on them, the torch blazing so brightly now that it cast harsh shadows across the entire deck. "That's not natural fire," Daemon whispered, his face pale with fear. "Look at it, it's burning white." Jon could hear him, but he was lost in the moment, feeling power flow through him like molten metal in his veins. The dragon eggs against his chest were almost too hot to bear now, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He could hear something in his mind, not words, but emotions. Hunger, rage, the desire to burn and consume. He swung the torch at another stone man, and again the flame leaped forward, searing through scales that should have been impervious to normal fire. The creature fell, its body cracking like heated stone. "Jon." Thoros' voice cut through the haze of power. "Jon, control it, don't let it consume you." But Jon was beyond hearing. He moved across the deck like an avenging spirit, the torch in his hand blazing with impossible heat. Stone men fell before him, their ancient curse no match for the fire that burned within him. It was Ygritte who finally reached him. She grabbed his free hand, her touch somehow cutting through the rage and power that threatened to overwhelm him. "Jon," she said, her voice hoarse from nearly being strangled. "Jon, it's me. Come back." He blinked, suddenly aware of what he was doing. The torch in his hand was still burning, but the flame had returned to normal, or what passed for normal. Around him, the deck was littered with the smoking remains of stone men, their bodies cracked and blackened. The surviving stone men had retreated to the water, floating just out of reach but still watching the ship with their blind eyes. They seemed to be waiting for something. "What did you do?" Daemon asked, his voice shaking. That wasn't natural." Jon looked down at the torch, then at his hand. His palm was unmarked, despite having held a flame hot enough to crack stone. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I do," Thoros said grimly. "The Lord of Light has marked you, boy. Fire answers to your call." "That's not possible," Ser Jorah said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Men can't control fire like that." "Can't they?" Thoros replied. "The priests of R'hllor can make flames dance and burn cold or hot at will. But what Jon did, that was something else, something older." Gareth Stone was backing away from Jon, his sword still in his hand. "He's cursed," the sellsword said. "Did you see what he did? That fire was hot enough to melt steel, and he held it in his bare hand." "He saved our lives," Ygritte said fiercely. "Those things would have killed us all if not for him." "Maybe," Gareth replied. "Or maybe he brought them down on us in the first place. Ever since we took those eggs from the ruins, everything's gone wrong." "The eggs have nothing to do with this," Jon said. But even as he spoke, he could feel them pulsing against his chest, warm as living hearts. "Don't they?" Daemon asked. "You think it's a coincidence that stone men attacked us right after we stole dragon eggs from their tomb? Those things are cursed, and they're cursing all of us." "Enough," Captain Kevo called from the wheel. "We're clear of the stone men for now, but we need to get out of these waters before they regroup." The ship limped forward through the smoking sea, its hull scarred from the attack but still seaworthy. The stone men followed at a distance, never quite disappearing but never approaching close enough to threaten them again. As the immediate danger passed, Jon became aware of the way the others were looking at him. There was fear in their eyes and suspicion. Even Ygritte seemed different, watching him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. We need to talk, Thoros said quietly, drawing Jon aside. What happened back there? It's going to raise questions. What kind of questions? The kind that get people burned as sorcerers, Thoros replied grimly. The world doesn't understand power like yours, Jon. They fear it, and fear makes men do terrible things. Jon touched the bundle containing the dragon eggs. The eggs did something to me, didn't they? When I touched them in the temple. Perhaps, Thoros said. Or perhaps they simply awakened something that was already there. The blood of old Valyria runs in many veins, though most never know it. But you're different. The flames have shown me glimpses of your future, and it's both glorious and terrible. What did you see? Thoros was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the cursed waters around them. Fire, he said finally. Fire and blood, and the sound of dragons' wings. You're going to change the world, Jon Snow. The question is whether it will survive the changing. That night, as the Maiden's Folly finally cleared the smoking sea and entered the cleaner waters beyond, Jon lay in his hammock, the dragon eggs wrapped in his cloak beside him. He could feel their warmth, and sometimes he thought he could hear something moving inside them, a soft scratching, as if something was trying to get out. The others gave him a wide berth now. Gareth Stone had approached Captain Cavo earlier, Jon had overheard, suggesting they throw him overboard before whatever curse he carried could spread to the rest of them. Only Cavo's fear of Thoros had prevented the sellsword from acting on his suspicions. Can't sleep? Ygritte's voice came from the darkness beside him. Too much to think about, Jon replied. She was quiet for a while, then said, That fire, I've never seen anything like it. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Are you afraid of me now? Jon asked. I don't know, she said honestly. You saved my life, but you're not the same boy I met in that tavern in Pentos, are you? Jon considered the question. Was he the same? He felt different, that was certain. The power that had flowed through him during the fight had felt natural, as if he had been born to wield fire. And the eggs, they called to him in ways he couldn't explain. I don't think so, he said finally, but I don't know what I'm becoming. Neither do I, Ygritte said, but I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you are, whatever you're becoming, we'll figure it out together. Her words brought him comfort, but they couldn't quiet the fears that gnawed at him. The dragon eggs pulsed gently against his side, and in his dreams that night, he heard voices speaking in High Valyrian, telling him of prophecies and destinies he didn't understand. In his dreams, great dragons soared through skies of flame, and a voice like thunder called his name, Blood of my blood, fire of my fire, wake us from our stone sleep, wake us and let the world burn. Jon woke with the taste of ash in his mouth, and the sound of beating wings echoing in his ears. The dragon eggs were warm against his skin, warmer than they had ever been before. And somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard the cry of something that had been sleeping for far too long. The boy who had left Winterfell in search of adventure was gone, replaced by something new and dangerous. As the ship carried them away from the cursed ruins of Valyria, Jon Snow clutched the dragon eggs to his chest and wondered if he was carrying salvation or damnation. The flames had marked him, and there would be no going back. 3 days later, as they approached the port of Volantis, Daemon Brightflame made his move. Jon was standing at the bow, watching the great city grow larger on the horizon, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Daemon approaching, but something in the young Taroshi's expression made him tense. We need to talk, Daemon said, his hand resting on his sword hilt. About what? About those cursed eggs you're carrying, and what they're doing to all of us. Jon glanced around and saw that Gareth Stone and another crew member had positioned themselves to block his retreat. This had been planned. I don't know what you mean, Jon said carefully. Don't lie to me, Daemon snarled. Ever since you touched those things, you've been different. And now you can control fire like some kind of sorcerer. Those eggs are cursed, and they're cursing all of us. The eggs haven't hurt anyone, Jon protested. Haven't they? Gareth Stone stepped forward. Willem disappeared in the ruins. Cora was crushed. And those stone men, they came after us because of what you took. You don't know that. I know enough, Daemon said, drawing his sword. Those eggs need to go overboard, and if you won't give them up willingly... He lunged forward, but Jon was ready. The months of training with Thoros had honed his reflexes, and he sidestepped the attack, drawing his own blade in one smooth motion. Jon! Ygritte's voice called from across the deck. She had seen the confrontation and was running toward them, her bow in hand. The fight was brief but vicious. Daemon was older and stronger, but Jon had desperation on his side. More importantly, he had something else, the power that had awakened in him during the fight with the stone men. As their blades clashed, Jon felt heat building in his chest. The dragon eggs wrapped in his cloak nearby began to pulse with warmth. Without conscious thought, he channeled that heat into his sword. Daemon's eyes widened as Jon's blade began to glow with inner fire. The steel grew hot enough to scorch the air, and when it met Daemon's sword, the Tyroshi's blade shattered like glass. Sorcery, Gareth breathed, backing away. Jon advanced on Daemon, his glowing sword held at the young man's throat. "The eggs stay with me," he said quietly. "And if anyone else wants to challenge that, they're welcome to try." Daemon fell to his knees, his face pale with terror. "Please," he whispered, "I have a family. I was just scared." Jon stared down at him for a long moment, feeling the power coursing through him like molten metal. It would be so easy to end this threat, to silence the fear and suspicion with fire and blood. But then he heard Wright's voice. "Jon, that's enough." He blinked, suddenly aware of what he was doing. The sword in his hand was still glowing, hot enough to cut through steel, and Daemon was cowering before him like a beaten dog. With an effort of will, Jon stepped back and let the heat fade from his blade. "Get up," he said, "and stay away from me." Daemon scrambled to his feet and fled to the other side of the ship, followed by Gareth Stone and the crew member who had supported him. They gave Jon a wide berth for the rest of the voyage, whispering among themselves and making signs against evil. "You're getting stronger," Thoros observed that evening as they prepared to dock in Volantis. "The power is growing." "Is that good or bad?" Jon asked. "That depends on what you do with it," Thoros replied. "Power corrupts, Jon. I've seen it happen to good men. The flames show them visions of glory, and they lose themselves in the pursuit of it." "What should I do?" "Learn control," Thoros said, "and remember that with great power comes great responsibility. The world will fear you, Jon. They'll try to use you or destroy you. You need to be ready for both." As the Maiden's Folly docked in Volantis, Jon stood at the rail with the dragon eggs wrapped securely in his cloak. The ancient city sprawled before him, its black walls and red temples a reminder of the power that had once ruled this part of the world. He was no longer the bastard boy who had left Winterfell in search of adventure. The fire had marked him, changed him, made him into something new and dangerous. The dragon eggs pulsed against his chest like sleeping hearts, and in his dreams ancient voices whispered of prophecies and destinies. The world would never be the same, and neither would he. As they disembarked, Jon caught sight of his reflection in the dark water of the harbor. For just a moment, his eyes seemed to glow with inner fire, and he could swear he saw wings spreading behind him in the shadows. The dragons were waking, and when they did, the world would burn. The Golden Company's camp sprawled across the hills outside Volantis like a small city of canvas and steel. Smoke from 100 cook fires drifted across the evening sky, mixing the scents of roasting meat with the acrid tang of weapon oil and leather. Jon Snow walked between the rows of tents, his hand resting on his sword hilt, the dragon eggs wrapped securely in his travel pack. At 13, he had grown taller during their months in Essos, his shoulders broader, but among these hardened sellswords he still felt like a boy playing at being a man. "Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut," Thoros of Myr advised quietly as they approached the command pavilion. "These men respect strength above all else, and they can smell weakness like hounds scent blood." The Red Priest had arranged their meeting with Captain General Miles Toyne through contacts in the Red Temple of Volantis. The Golden Company was between contracts, having recently completed a campaign in the disputed lands, and Thoros believed they could provide the protection Jon needed while he learned to master his growing powers. "I still don't like this," Ygritte muttered, walking close beside Jon. Her bow was strung and ready, and her eyes constantly scanned the sellswords they passed. "These men fight for coin, not loyalty. They'll sell us to the highest bidder the moment it suits them." "Perhaps," Thoros replied, "but Jon needs to learn how the world works beyond the walls of castles and the pages of books. These men understand power in its rawest form." The command pavilion was larger than the others, its golden cloth marked with the skull and 7 stars of the Golden Company. Guards in mail and leather stood at attention as they approached, their faces professionally neutral, but their hands never straying far from their weapons. "Thoros of Myr," one of the guards announced. "The Captain General is expecting you." Inside, the pavilion was divided into sections by hanging tapestries. Maps covered a large table in the center, weighted down with coins and daggers. Captain General Miles Toyne stood studying them, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and scars that spoke of decades of warfare. Beside him stood his lieutenants, Sir Franklin Flowers, called the Bastard of Cider Hall, and Captain Gory Zadorian, a Volantine noble who had fallen from grace. "Thoros," Toyne said, without looking up from his maps. "I hear you have a proposition for me." "Indeed, Captain General. My young companion here requires training in the arts of war and leadership. In exchange, we offer our services and a substantial payment in gold." Toyne finally looked up, his pale eyes studying Jon with the calculating gaze of a man who had survived 30 years of sellsword politics. "This boy? He looks like he'd break in half if you breathed on him too hard." Jon felt heat rise in his cheeks, but Thoros' warning glance kept him silent. "Appearances can deceive," Thoros said smoothly. "The boy has talents that might prove useful to your company." "What kind of talents?" Sir Franklin asked, his hand resting on his sword hilt. The bastard knight had the look of a man who trusted no one and expected betrayal from every quarter. Before Thoros could answer, another voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps we should let the boy speak for himself." Jon turned to see a man emerging from behind one of the tapestries. He was tall and lean, with the olive skin of Dorne and eyes like chips of obsidian. His clothes were fine but practical, and he moved with the fluid grace of a trained killer. "Captain Daemon Sand," Toyne said by way of introduction, "one of our newest recruits, but already proving his worth." Daemon Sand smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm curious about this boy with talents. In my experience, young men who claim special abilities often find themselves dead before they can prove them." Jon felt the dragon eggs pulse with warmth against his back, responding to the subtle threat in the Dornish captain's words. For a moment he considered demonstrating his ability with fire, but something in Daemon's expression warned him that would be a mistake. "I can fight," Jon said simply, "and I can lead men, given the chance to prove it." "Can you now?" Daemon's smile widened. "How refreshing. Another lordling who thinks birth and breeding make him a warrior." "I'm a bastard, not a lord," Jon replied, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "And I've never claimed that birth makes anyone a warrior. Only training and experience do that." "Well said," Captain General Toyne interjected before Daemon could respond. "Very well, Thoros. We'll take your gold and give your boy a chance to prove himself. But understand this, in the Golden Company, men earn their place through deed, not word. If he can't keep up, he'll be left behind." "Understood," Thoros replied. "When do we begin?" "Now," Sir Franklin said, drawing his sword. "Let's see what the boy can do." The training yard was a cleared space at the center of the camp, surrounded by weapon racks and practice dummies. Word of the new recruit's trial had spread quickly, and sellswords gathered to watch as Jon faced Sir Franklin in the circle. "First lesson," the bastard knight said, circling Jon with his blade held low. "In the Golden Company, we don't fight for honor or glory. We fight to win, and we use whatever means necessary." He attacked without warning, his sword whistling through the air where Jon's head had been a moment before. Jon rolled aside, drawing his own blade as he came to his feet, but Franklin was already pressing the attack. The bastard knight was good, better than good. His blade work was economical and brutal, each strike designed to end the fight quickly. Jon found himself driven back, parrying desperately as the older man's sword seemed to come from every direction at once. "Too slow," Franklin taunted, his blade slicing across Jon's shoulder, drawing blood through his leather jerkin. "Too predictable. In a real fight, you'd be dead already." Jon gritted his teeth and tried to remember Thoros' lessons. The Red Priest had taught him that swordplay was as much about the mind as the body, about reading your opponent and anticipating their moves. But Franklin's style was unlike anything he had faced before, dirty, practical, and utterly without mercy. The bastard knight's next attack nearly took Jon's head off, the blade passing so close he felt the wind of its passage. As Jon stumbled backward, he heard laughter from the watching sellswords. "Enough playing," Daemon Sand called from the crowd. "Finish him, Franklin." The words stung Jon more than the cut on his shoulder. He was being humiliated in front of these men, marked as weak and useless. The dragon egg seemed to pulse with heat against his back, and he felt that familiar warmth building in his chest. Franklin came at him again, his sword aimed at Jon's heart, and this time Jon didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, inside the arc of the blade, and grabbed the bastard knight's wrist. For a moment they struggled, face to face, and Jon let just a hint of his fire flow through his hands. Franklin's eyes widened as he felt the heat, his grip on his sword loosening involuntarily. Jon twisted, broke free, and brought his pommel up in a vicious strike that caught the older man under the chin. Franklin staggered backward, blood flowing from his split lip. Better, the bastard knight admitted, wiping blood from his mouth, but still not good enough. He attacked again, but this time Jon was ready. He had learned Franklin's rhythm, understood the brutal efficiency of his style. When the bastard knight's sword came whistling toward his ribs, Jon wasn't there. When Franklin tried to recover with a backhand slash, Jon's blade was waiting to turn it aside. The fight continued for several more minutes, neither man able to gain a decisive advantage. Jon was younger and faster, but Franklin had experience and cunning. It might have gone on indefinitely if Captain General Toyne hadn't called a halt. "Enough," the older man said, stepping into the circle. "You've both proven your points. Franklin, the boy's not as helpless as he looks. Jon, you've got potential, but you need work. Lots of work." Jon lowered his sword, breathing hard. His shoulder throbbed where Franklin's blade had cut him, and he could feel sweat stinging his eyes. But he had held his own against one of the Golden Company's best, and that was something. "Welcome to the Golden Company," Toyne said. "Try not to get yourself killed in the first week." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Jon's young life. He rose before dawn for sword practice with Sarah Franklin, spent his mornings learning tactics and strategy from Captain Gorys, and devoted his afternoons to what Toyne called practical education, learning how to read men's faces, how to judge their loyalties, and how to inspire them to follow you into battle. "A sellsword company is not an army," Toyne explained during one of their evening discussions. "We have no kings or lords to command absolute obedience. Every man here chose to be here, and every man can choose to leave. A captain who forgets that will find himself leading no one but his own shadow." Jon absorbed these lessons eagerly, but he found the reality of sellsword life more complex than he had expected. These men were not the noble knights of songs and stories. They were hard, practical men who had chosen a life of violence for coin, and their morality was as flexible as their loyalties. He learned this lesson harshly during his first mission with the company. A Volantis merchant named Bellico had hired the Golden Company to escort a caravan through the disputed lands, where bandits and rival trading houses made the roads dangerous. It should have been a simple job: show strength, discourage attacks, and collect payment upon arrival in Myr. Jon rode with Captain Daemon Sand's column, 20 men tasked with scouting ahead of the main caravan. The Dornish captain had taken a particular interest in Jon since his arrival, though whether that interest was friendly or hostile remained unclear. "Tell me, bastard," Daemon said as they rode through a valley dotted with abandoned farms. "What do you know of the disputed lands?" "They've been fought over for centuries," Jon replied. "No one power has ever been able to hold them for long." "And do you know why?" Jon considered the question. Too many competing interests. Tyrosh, Lys, and Myr all claim parts of the territory, but none is strong enough to drive out the others permanently. "Clever boy," Daemon said with that cold smile of his. "But you're missing the most important factor. The people who live here don't want to be ruled by any of them. They've learned that survival means bending with the wind, switching sides whenever it's convenient." As if to prove his point, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising from a village in the valley below. As they rode closer, Jon could see that several buildings were burning, and bodies lay scattered in the streets. "Bandits," one of the scouts reported. "Looks like they hit the place this morning." "Any survivors?" Daemon asked. "Some. Hiding in the sept, looks like." Jon felt his stomach clench. "We have to help them." Daemon's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Help them? Boy, we're not here to play hero. We're here to escort a caravan, nothing more." "But they're innocent people," Jon protested. "Women and children." "Innocent." Daemon's eyes glittered with amusement. "In the disputed lands, no one is innocent. These villagers probably sold information to the bandits about our caravan route. They're all complicit." Jon looked around at the other sellswords, hoping to find support, but their faces were stone. This was just another day's work to them, another village that had picked the wrong side. "I'm going to check on the survivors," Jon said, turning his horse toward the sept. "No," Daemon said sharply. "You're going to stay with the column. That's an order." For a moment, Jon considered defying him. The dragon eggs pulsed with warmth against his back, and he felt that familiar heat building in his chest. It would be so easy to let the fire loose, to burn away Daemon's smug certainty. But Thoros' warnings echoed in his mind. Control. Always control. "Fine," Jon said through gritted teeth. "But I want it noted that I objected." Your objection is noted and ignored, Daemon replied. Now let's move. We have a schedule to keep. They rode past the burning village without stopping, and Jon forced himself not to look back at the sept, where frightened people huddled in the darkness. This was the reality of sellsword life, he realized. Pragmatism over principle, profit over compassion. That night, as they made camp in a defensible position overlooking the trade road, Jon found himself unable to sleep. The image of that burning village haunted him, along with the knowledge that he had done nothing to help. Troubled conscience? Ygritte asked, settling down beside him. She had been unusually quiet during the day's ride, and Jon could see the same conflict in her eyes that he felt in his heart. We could have helped them, he said quietly. It wouldn't have cost us anything to check on the survivors, maybe leave them some supplies. Aye, she agreed. But that's not how these men think. They see kindness as weakness, mercy as a luxury they can't afford. Then maybe we're with the wrong people. Ygritte was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. I've been thinking the same thing, she said finally. Jon, we could leave. Tonight if you wanted, take the eggs and disappear. Find somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. The offer was tempting. Jon could picture it. A small cottage by the sea, perhaps, where they could live simply and peacefully. No politics, no violence, no dragon eggs pulsing with ancient power against his back. But even as he considered it, he heard Thoros' voice in his memory. Fire has chosen you, you cannot choose another path. I can't, he said finally. Whatever these eggs are, whatever power they represent, I can't just hide from it. Too many people might suffer if I do. And what about us? Ygritte asked, her voice small. What about what we might have together? Jon reached for her hand, feeling the calluses from her bowstring rough against his palm. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I can't run from this. Not yet. She squeezed his hand, then pulled away. Then I guess we see it through, she said. But Jon, promise me something. Promise me you won't let this power change you into something I don't recognize. I promise, he said, though even as the words left his lips, he wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The attack came 3 nights later. Jon woke to the sound of steel on steel and men shouting in the darkness. He rolled out of his bedroll, grabbing for his sword as shapes moved through the camp like deadly shadows. Bandits, he realized, or perhaps rival sellswords hired to eliminate the competition. Jon, Ygritte's voice cut through the chaos. She was crouched behind an overturned wagon, her bow singing as she sent arrows into the attacking force. They're everywhere. Jon ran toward her, his blade flashing in the firelight as he cut down a bandit who tried to intercept him. The camp was in chaos, sellswords fighting desperately against overwhelming numbers. In the confusion, it was impossible to tell friend from foe. That's when he saw Captain Daemon Sand. The Dornish captain was moving through the battle with deadly purpose, but he wasn't fighting the bandits. Instead, he was cutting down Golden Company men, his blade finding gaps in their armor with surgical precision. Betrayer, Jon shouted, charging toward him. Daemon turned, his obsidian eyes glittering in the firelight. Ah, the bastard boy. I was wondering when you'd notice. Why? Jon demanded, his sword raised between them. Why? Daemon laughed. Because Bellico offered me more gold than Toyne ever could, and because he's very interested in those dragon eggs you carry. Jon felt the eggs pulse with heat against his back, responding to his anger and fear. You'll never get them. Won't I? Daemon's smile was cold as winter. You're just a boy playing at being a warrior. I've been killing men since before you were born. He attacked with the fluid grace of a water dancer, his blade seeking Jon's heart with deadly precision. Jon barely managed to parry, the force of the blow sending vibrations up his arm. Daemon was fast, faster than Sir Franklin, and his technique was flawless. Too slow, Daemon taunted, his blade slicing across Jon's ribs. Too young, too weak. Jon stumbled backward, feeling blood seep through his jerkin. Around them, the battle raged on, but it felt distant and unreal. All that mattered was the deadly dance between him and the Dornish captain. Daemon pressed his advantage, his swordwork a thing of terrible beauty. Jon found himself driven back step by step, his parries growing more desperate with each exchange. The older man was simply too skilled, too experienced. When you're dead, Daemon said conversationally as their blades locked, I'll take good care of your wildling girl. She'll make an interesting diversion during the long voyage to Volantis. The words hit Jon like a physical blow, and he felt something snap inside him. The dragon eggs blazed with heat against his back, and that familiar fire began to build in his chest. But this time, he didn't try to control it. He let it loose. Flame erupted from his hands, engulfing his sword blade and turning it into a weapon of living fire. Daemon's eyes widened in shock as the burning steel came whistling toward his face. He tried to parry, but his own blade shattered against the superheated metal. Jon pressed forward, his flaming sword cutting through Daemon's defenses like they were made of parchment. The Dornish captain stumbled backward, his fine clothes smoldering where sparks had touched them. "Sorcery," Daemon gasped. "You're a bloody sorcerer." "I'm whatever I need to be," Jon replied, his voice strange and distant to his own ears. He thrust forward, and his burning blade took Daemon's sand through the throat. The captain's eyes went wide with surprise and pain, then glazed over as life fled from them. He collapsed to the ground, his blood hissing and steaming where it touched Jon's superheated sword. Jon stood over the body, breathing hard, the fire slowly fading from his blade. Around him, the battle was winding down as the surviving bandits fled into the night. But he barely noticed. All he could see was Daemon's face, frozen in that final moment of shock and pain. He had killed a man, not in the heat of battle, not in self-defense, but in cold, calculated revenge. And the worst part was that he felt no guilt about it, only a savage satisfaction that his enemy was dead. "Jon." Thoros' voice cut through his thoughts. The Red Priest approached carefully, his eyes taking in the scene. Daemon's body, Jon's bloodied sword, the lingering smell of supernatural fire. "He betrayed us," Jon said, his voice hollow. "He was going to sell us to Bellico. Take the eggs." "I know," Thoros replied gently. "I saw what happened. You did what you had to do." "Did I?" Jon looked down at his hands, half expecting to see blood on them. "Or did I do what I wanted to do?" Before Thoros could answer, Captain General Toyne appeared, his face grim in the firelight. "Daemon's dead," he observed, "and half my men with him. This contract has gone to hell." "What happens now?" Jon asked. Toyne studied him for a long moment, his pale eyes unreadable. Now we cut our losses and move on. But I'll tell you this, boy, what you did tonight, that fire trick, it's going to follow you. Men will talk and word will spread. You've marked yourself as something more than human." "Or less than human," Ygritte said quietly, appearing at Jon's side. She looked shaken, her face pale in the firelight. "Jon, what you did, I've never seen anything like it." Jon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. In Ygritte's eyes, he saw something he had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of him exactly, but fear of what he was becoming. "The eggs," Toyne said suddenly. "Daemon mentioned dragon eggs. Is that what this was all about?" Jon's hand moved instinctively to his pack, where the eggs rested wrapped in cloth. They were warm against his back, pulsing gently like sleeping hearts. "I don't know what you're talking about." Toyne's smile was thin and knowing. "Of course you don't. Well, whatever secrets you're carrying, boy, they're your business. But I'll give you some advice. Secrets like that have a way of getting people killed. You'd best be very careful who you trust." The Golden Company broke apart over the next few days. Some men followed Toyne back to Volantis. Others scattered to find new employment with different companies. The betrayal had shattered the bonds of trust that held the group together, and without that trust, they were just a collection of armed men with no common purpose. Jon, Ygritte, and Thoros found themselves alone again. Their brief experiment with sellsword life ended in blood and betrayal. They took passage on a merchant ship bound for Pentos, paying their way with what remained of their gold. As the ship pulled away from the Volantine docks, Jon stood at the rail, watching the ancient city fade into the distance. The dragon eggs were secure in his pack, but he could feel their weight like a physical burden. Toyne had been right. Secrets like these got people killed. The question was whether he was strong enough to bear that burden or whether it would eventually crush him. "Regrets?" Thoros asked, joining him at the rail. "Many," Jon admitted, "but not about leaving. Those men, they weren't what I thought they were." "And what did you think they were?" Jon considered the question. "Heroes, I suppose. Men who fought for something greater than themselves." "Some do," Thoros said, "but most fight for coin, or glory, or simply because it's the only life they know. The world is not full of heroes, Jon. Mostly it's full of people trying to survive, doing whatever they must to see another dawn." "Is that what I'm becoming?" Jon asked. "Just another person trying to survive?" Thoros was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sea. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I know this. The fire has marked you for something greater than mere survival. The question is whether you'll be strong enough to bear that burden without losing yourself in the process." Jon touched the dragon eggs through his pack, feeling their warmth pulse against his palm. In his dreams, he could hear voices calling to him, in High Valyrian, promising power and glory beyond imagining. But he could also hear Ygritte's voice, asking him not to change into something she couldn't recognize. The boy who had left Winterfell in search of adventure was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. As the ship carried them toward an uncertain future, Jon Snow wondered if the man he was becoming would be a hero or a monster. Only time would tell. The inn at Norvos was a ramshackle affair of weathered stone and rotting timber, perched on the edge of the city's lower district like a drunk clinging to a cliff face. The Weeping Widow, as the locals called it, catered to travelers who couldn't afford better accommodations, sellswords between contracts, merchants down on their luck, and refugees fleeing the endless wars that plagued the free cities. Jon Snow sat in the common room's darkest corner, nursing a cup of watered wine and watching the other patrons through hooded eyes. At 13 he had learned to make himself unremarkable, to blend into shadows and avoid drawing attention. The dragon eggs rested in a specially crafted pack against his back, their warmth a constant reminder of the power he carried and the dangers it brought. 3 weeks had passed since they'd fled Volantis after the Golden Company's betrayal. 3 weeks of moving from city to city, always looking over their shoulders, always wondering if the next face in the crowd belonged to someone hunting them. The eggs were worth a kingdom's ransom, and word of their existence had begun to spread through the underworld of Essos like wildfire. "You're brooding again," Ygritte said, sliding into the seat across from him. Her red hair was hidden beneath a worn hood, but her green eyes sparkled with mischief despite their circumstances. "It's not a good look on you, Jon Snow." "Someone has to watch for trouble," he replied, though he couldn't suppress a small smile at her teasing. "Thoros says we can't stay here much longer. Too many people asking questions." "Let them ask," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "We've got nothing to hide." Jon glanced meaningfully at his pack. "Don't we?" Before Ygritte could answer, a commotion near the inn's entrance drew their attention. Thoros of Myr had entered, his red robes marking him immediately as a priest of Roflor, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a boy of perhaps 11 years, thin and dark-haired, with the olive skin common to the eastern free cities. The boy's clothes were little more than rags, and angry welts marked his wrists where shackles had recently been removed. As Thoros approached their table, Jon could see the haunted look in the child's eyes, the hollow stare of someone who had seen too much suffering for his young years. "Jon, Ygritte," Thoros said quietly, settling into a chair. "I'd like you to meet Lysander. I found him in the slave market, about to be sold to a pleasure house in Lysand." Jon felt his stomach clench. He had heard stories of what happened to young boys in such places, and the thought made him sick. "You bought him?" "I liberated him," Thoros corrected. "The slavers won't be selling anyone else, I can assure you of that." The boy Lysander hadn't spoken yet, but his dark eyes darted constantly around the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. Jon recognized the behavior. He had done the same thing when he first arrived in Essos, overwhelmed by the strangeness and danger of this foreign land. "It's all right," Jon said gently, addressing the boy directly. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Lysander's gaze fixed on him, and for a moment Jon saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Hope, perhaps, or simple gratitude. When the boy finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You are Jon Snow," he said in accented common tongue. "The one they call the Fire-Touched." Jon stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Everyone knows," Lysander replied, his voice growing slightly stronger. "In the markets, in the taverns, even in the slave pens, they say you carry dragon fire in your hands, that you can burn men to ash with a touch." "People say many things," Thoros interjected smoothly. "Most of them are nonsense. Lysander, you must be hungry. Shall we order you some food?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Thoros signaled the serving girl. As they waited for the meal to arrive, Jon studied their new companion more closely. Lysander was clearly intelligent, his eyes missed nothing, and he had already identified the best escape routes from their table. But there was something else, a calculating quality that made Jon uneasy. "Where are you from?" Ygritte asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Tyrosh originally," Lysander replied, "but I have been many places. My master was a trader who dealt in exotic goods. He traveled often, and I went with him." Until the slavers took you, Jon said. A shadow passed over the boy's face. My master died of fever in Volantis. His creditors sold me to pay his debts. I have been in chains for 3 months. The food arrived, bread, cheese, and a bowl of thick stew that Lysander attacked with the desperate hunger of someone who had gone too long without a proper meal. Between bites, he peppered them with questions about their travels, their plans, their companions. His curiosity seemed innocent enough, but Jon noticed how skillfully he guided the conversation, how he gathered information while revealing little about himself. We should find rooms for the night, Thoros said eventually. Tomorrow we'll need to decide our next move. As they climbed the narrow stairs to the inn's upper floor, Ygritte caught Jon's arm, pulling him back. I don't like him, she whispered. The boy, he's just frightened and grateful. You can hardly blame him for being curious. It's not curiosity, Jon. It's calculation. He's studying us, learning our weaknesses. I've seen that look before in the eyes of hunters stalking their prey. Jon glanced ahead to where Lysander walked beside Thoros, chattering animatedly about the wonders of Norvos. The boys seemed harmless enough, but Ygritte's instincts were usually sound. We'll keep an eye on him, Jon promised. But he's just a child, Ygritte. If we can't show mercy to children, what does that make us? She squeezed his arm. It makes us alive, she said simply. But you're right, we'll watch him. Just be careful, Jon. Your good heart will get you killed someday. Their rooms were small and spartanly furnished, but clean enough. Jon had just finished checking the window locks when a soft knock came at his door. He opened it to find Lysander standing in the hallway, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had downstairs. I wanted to thank you, the boy said, for letting me travel with you. I know you don't know me, don't have any reason to trust me. Everyone deserves a chance, Jon replied. But Lysander, if you're planning to betray us, you should know that it won't end well for you. The boy's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine shock. Betray you? Jon Snow, you saved my life. I would die before I betrayed you. The words sounded sincere, and Jon felt his suspicions begin to fade. I'm sorry, it's just we've been betrayed before. It makes a man cautious. I understand, Lysander said, but you have my word. I am your loyal friend, now and always. After the boy left, Jon tried to sleep, but his mind was too active. The dragon eggs pulsed gently against his back, their warmth a constant reminder of the power and responsibility he carried. In his dreams, he saw great dragons soaring through skies of flame, and heard voices speaking in High Valyrian, promising him dominion over fire and blood. He woke before dawn, as had become his habit, and made his way to the inn's roof. The city of Norvos spread out below him, its terraced buildings climbing the hillsides like steps for giants. In the distance, he could see the great bell towers that gave the city its distinctive skyline, their bronze bells silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Couldn't sleep either. Jon turned to find Ygritte climbing through the roof access, her bow slung across her shoulder. She had taken to keeping it with her always, even when sleeping, a precaution born of hard experience. Too many dreams, he said. The eggs, they're getting stronger. Sometimes I can hear them calling to me. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. What do they say? Nothing I can understand. It's like hearing voices through water, or remembering a song you heard as a child but can't quite recall. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun rise over the eastern mountains. The light painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Jon found himself thinking of the flames that danced at his command. Fire had always been beautiful to him, even before he learned to control it. Now it felt like an extension of his own soul. Jon, Ygritte said suddenly, her voice soft and uncertain. There's something I need to tell you. He turned to look at her, noting the flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the morning chill. What is it? She took a deep breath as if steeling herself for battle. I love you. The words hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Jon felt his heart skip a beat, then begin racing like a warhorse charging into battle. He had known, on some level, that his feelings for Ygritte had grown beyond simple friendship. But hearing her say the words aloud made them real in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. Ygritte, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. Let me finish, she said. I know we're young. I know the world thinks we're just children playing at being adults. But what I feel for you, it's real, Jon. It's the most real thing in my life. Jon reached out and took her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his own. I love you too, he said simply. I think I have since that first night in Pentos when you stood up to those sellswords. Her smile was radiant, brighter than the sunrise behind her. Really? Really? She stepped closer, and Jon felt his breath catch. This close he could see the freckles scattered across her nose, could smell the scent of her hair, wood smoke and wildflowers, and something uniquely her own. "Kiss me," she whispered. Jon had never kissed a girl before, wasn't sure he knew how. But as Ygritte rose on her toes and their lips met, instinct took over. The kiss was soft and sweet and perfect, tasting of morning air and promises yet to be made. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jon felt as if the world had shifted around him, as if everything that had come before was just preparation for this moment. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know," Ygritte admitted. "But Jon, I dream sometimes, about us, I mean. About a future where we don't have to worry about dragon eggs or prophecies or priests telling us what we're meant to do. Where we could just be together, free to go where we want and do what we choose." The image she painted was seductive. A simple life, free from the burdens of power and destiny. Jon could picture it clearly. A small cottage somewhere far from the politics of kings and the schemes of priests, where he and Ygritte could grow old together in peace. But even as he imagined it, he felt the dragon eggs pulse against his back, reminding him of the path he had chosen, or perhaps the path that had chosen him. "It sounds wonderful," he said honestly, "but I don't think it's possible. Not for me." "Why not?" she demanded. "Because Thoros says you're meant for something greater? Because some ancient prophecy claims you're important? Jon, you're 13 years old. You should be learning to be a man, not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." "But I am carrying it," he replied, "and I can't just put it down because it's heavy. Too many people might suffer if I do." Ygritte's expression grew stubborn. "What about what we might suffer? What about our happiness?" Before Jon could answer, the roof access door opened, and Thoros emerged, his red robes billowing in the morning breeze. The priest took in the scene, Jon and Ygritte standing close together, their hands still clasped, and his expression grew thoughtful. "Good morning," he said mildly. "I trust you both slept well?" "Well enough," Jon replied, though he felt heat rising in his cheeks. Thoros nodded, then moved to stand at the roof's edge, gazing out over the city. "Jon, might I have a word with you, privately?" Ygritte squeezed Jon's hand once, then released it. "I'll see you at breakfast," she said, shooting Thoros a look that could have melted steel. After she left, Thoros was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but serious. "You care for her." It wasn't a question, but Jon answered anyway. "Yes, and she for you, clearly. Young love is a beautiful thing, Jon, but also dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Thoros turned to face him, his eyes reflecting the morning light, like polished amber. "Because the world will use your heart to chain you, lad. Every enemy you make, every rival who seeks to bring you down, will look for ways to hurt you. And the surest way to hurt a man is through those he loves." Jon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Are you saying I should stay away from her?" "I'm saying you should be careful. Love makes us vulnerable, Jon. It gives our enemies weapons to use against us. And you will have many enemies in the years to come." "Because of the eggs?" "Because of what you represent. Power, Jon. The kind of power that can reshape the world. There will always be those who want to control that power, or destroy it if they cannot possess it." Jon touched his pack, feeling the familiar warmth of the dragon eggs. "Sometimes I wish I'd never found them." "Do you?" Thoros asked. "Or do you wish the burden was easier to bear?" Jon considered the question. "The second, I think." "Then you're learning wisdom. The burden is yours, Jon. Whether you want it or not, the question is what you'll do with it." They were interrupted by footsteps on the stairs, and Lysander's head appeared through the roof access. "Jon? Thoros? The innkeeper says there are men asking about you downstairs. Armed men." Jon and Thoros exchanged glances. "How many?" Thoros asked. 6, maybe 7. They're not being subtle about it." "Slavers?" Jon asked. "Possibly, or bounty hunters. Either way, we should leave now." They gathered their belongings quickly, Jon making sure the dragon eggs were secure in his pack. Ygritte was waiting in the hallway, her bow strung and ready. "The back stairs," Thoros said quietly. "We'll slip out through the kitchen." But as they reached the ground floor, they could hear voices from the common room, harsh, demanding voices speaking in the bastard Valyrian of the slave cities. "They're looking for a boy with strange eyes and a wildling girl," Lysander whispered, his face pale with fear. They know you're here. Jon felt the dragon eggs pulse with heat, responding to his rising anger and fear. How? He demanded. We've been careful. Someone talked, Ygritte said grimly. Someone always talks. They made it to the kitchen without being seen, but as they approached the back door, it opened to reveal 2 armed men blocking their escape. The slavers had anticipated their move. Well, well, one of them said in accented common tongue, the fire-touched and his little wildling, you've led us quite a chase. Jon's hand moved to his sword hilt, but the slaver shook his head. I wouldn't, boy. There are more of us than you can handle, and we have crossbows trained on your pretty girlfriend. As if to prove his point, another slaver appeared in the doorway behind them, a loaded crossbow aimed at Ygritte's heart. What do you want? Jon asked, though he already knew the answer. You know what we want. The eggs. Hand them over, and maybe we'll let you live. And if I refuse? The slaver's smile was cold as winter. Then we take them anyway, and sell what's left of you to the fighting pits of Meereen. Jon felt the familiar heat building in his chest, the dragon eggs responding to his emotions. It would be so easy to let the fire loose, to burn these men to ash and cinders, but there were too many of them, and innocents might be caught in the flames. That's when Lysander stepped forward. Wait, the boy said, his voice shaking with apparent fear. Please, don't hurt them. They've been kind to me. Lysander, get back, Jon ordered, but the boy ignored him. I can help you, Lysander continued, addressing the slavers. I know where they keep the eggs, know their plans. Spare them, and I'll tell you everything. Jon felt the world tilt around him, as understanding crashed over him like a wave. The boy's quick questions, his calculating eyes, his convenient appearance at just the right moment, it had all been a lie. You, he whispered, you betrayed us. Lysander's face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse. I'm sorry, Jon, truly, but they have my sister. If I don't help them, they'll sell her to the pleasure houses. I couldn't let that happen. So you sold us instead. I never meant for it to go this far, Lysander said desperately. I thought maybe I could warn you, give you a chance to escape. But you didn't, Ygritte said, her voice flat with betrayal. You led them right to us. The lead slaver was growing impatient. Enough talk, boy, give us the eggs, or we start cutting pieces off your friends. Jon's mind raced, looking for options, for any way out of this trap. But they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, caught like rats in a cage. That's when Thoros acted. The Red Priest stepped forward, his hands beginning to glow with supernatural fire. In the name of Rokular, Lord of Light, I command you to release these children. The slavers laughed. Your fire god has no power here, priest. This is the domain of the many-faced god, and he hungers for blood. Thoros raised his hands, and flames erupted from his palms. But the slavers were ready. Crossbow bolts flew through the air, and the priest staggered as one took him in the shoulder. In the chaos that followed, Jon lost sight of Ygritte. He heard her cry out, heard the sound of a struggle, but when he looked around, she was gone. Ygritte, he shouted, but there was no answer. The slavers were retreating, their mission apparently accomplished. Jon started to pursue them, but Thoros caught his arm. Let them go, the priest gasped, blood seeping through his robes. It's too late. They took her, Jon said, his voice breaking. They took Ygritte. I know, Thoros replied, and we'll get her back, but not like this, not in blind rage. Jon turned to where Lysander stood, the boy's face streaked with tears. This is your fault, he snarled, all of it. I'm sorry, Lysander whispered. I'm so sorry. Jon felt the dragon eggs blazing against his back, felt fire building in his hands. It would be so easy to end the boy's life, to burn away the betrayal and pain with cleansing flame. But as he raised his hands, he heard Ygritte's voice in his memory. Promise me you won't let this power change you into something I don't recognize. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his hands. Get out, he said quietly. Get out before I change my mind. Lysander fled without another word, leaving Jon and Thoros alone in the ruined kitchen. The priest was trying to tend his wound, but his hands were shaking from blood loss. We have to find her, Jon said. We will, Thoros promised, but first we need to plan. The slavers will be expecting pursuit. They'll be ready for us. Jon nodded, though every instinct screamed at him to give chase immediately. Ygritte was out there somewhere, probably in chains, probably terrified, and it was his fault. If he hadn't trusted Lysander, if he had listened to Ygritte's warnings. This is what you meant, isn't it? he asked Thoros, about the world using my heart to chain me? Yes, the priest replied sadly. I'm sorry, Jon, I truly am. Jon touched the dragon eggs, feeling their warmth pulse against his palm. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of bells, the great bronze bells of Norvos ringing out the hour. But to Jon, they sounded like a funeral dirge. Ygritte was gone, taken by slavers who would sell her to the highest bidder. And it was his fault, his naivety and trust, that had put her in danger. But he would get her back. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would find her and bring her home. The dragon eggs pulsed with heat, as if responding to his determination. In his mind, he could hear ancient voices whispering of fire and blood, of vengeance and justice. The boy who had shared his first kiss on a rooftop in Norvos was gone, burned away by betrayal and loss. In his place stood something harder, more dangerous. A young man who had learned that love was both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness. And somewhere in the slave markets of Essos, Ygritte waited for rescue, not knowing that her capture had awakened something terrible in the boy she loved. The dragons were stirring, and when they woke, the world would burn.